Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started so we leave our artists as much time as possible. Thank you all for being here. My name is Molly Pappas. I work in exhibitions here at the Hood. It's a great privilege to have these 10 artists in our inaugural installation of the new museum and to host them for today's conversations. We'll start this morning with panels on the global contemporary and new photographies and move on to painting now and art and social justice after a break for lunch. The symposium is also being projected into Alumni Hall in the Hopkins Center all day, which allows for food and drink. At 5 p.m., there will be an open house in the galleries with the panelists, followed by a reception in our atrium. Please don't hesitate to find me throughout the day if you have any questions, but for now, please let me introduce President Hanlon, who's going to kick off our morning for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you and good morning, everyone. It is truly a pleasure to be here to welcome you to the Hood and to this lively and compelling series of conversations led by artists whose works are currently on view. And I managed to see a few of them walking in here, and they're so breathtaking. So we're thrilled to have the artists here to offer their insights into their mediums, their techniques, what inspires them. But before we get to today's program, I have the special honor of dedicating this amazing space, the Charles Gilman Auditorium at the Hood Museum of Art. The Gilman family are great friends of Dartmouth and are known internationally as great friends of art. Among many things, Sandra Gonzalez-Fella helped create the fabulous photography collection at the Whitney Museum. Both the photography curatorial chair and the photography gallery at the Whitney are named in her honor. Sandra and her husband Celso also regularly share their collection of art around the world through the foundation created in their names. Thanks to the Gilmans' generosity, visitors to the Hood can enjoy this splendid refurbished auditorium and benefit also from a significant programming endowment. This endowment will enable Dartmouth students, faculty, and community members to have direct access to exhibitions, lectures, and experiences with art that bring us together as humans through shared experience. In addition, Sandra and Celso generously funded the Hood downtown exhibits on Main Street that kept our connection to the community alive while we eagerly awaited the reopening of this museum. On behalf of the Dartmouth faculty, their students, our staff, and the many friends of the Hood Museum, a big thank you to Sandra, Celso, and the entire Gilman family. So as the Hood reopens, it is redoubling its commitment to the work of living artists from around the world. And that's what today's gathering is all about. You'll be reminded throughout the day that we ask the Hood to do much more than just display art. We ask the Hood to do nothing less than embody the core values of this institution. We see our strong engagement with ethics echoed in a collection rich in socially concerned art. We see cross-disciplinary discourse supported by art engaged with fields that range from environmental studies to urban planning to gender identity to indigenous rights. We see the value that Dartmouth places on diversity, exemplified by artists and individuals from myriad backgrounds and places coming together to share, discuss, and debate art. And we ask the Hood to be a place of learning. As we like to say, a place that teaches with art, not just about art. Over the course of the day, our speakers will bring these themes to life, challenging your assumptions, asking you to generate new ideas, causing you to ask the what if questions that form the basis of liberal arts learning. To the participating artists, thank you for being here and for gracing our gallery walls with your extraordinary work. To John Stomberg and the team at the Hood, thank you for orchestrating such an incredible gathering. And to all of you in attendance, thank you for engaging with the Hood and for sharing our passion for lifelong learning. Please enjoy the day.
Thank you, Phil. That was fantastic. It's so great to hear these heartening observations about art and Dartmouth from the president of the college himself. Thank you, Molly, for all of your hard work in putting this together. It's been a really wonderful time getting to know you and working on this project. It's been really amazing. And thank you to all the staff who've pulled together to bring this wonderful event to life. And thank you to the Hood Board of Advisors who are in attendance today, our greatest boosters and fans, always present. This event is made possible in part by the Hood Museum's Lecture Series Fund and the Alan P. Jones Class of 1919 Fund. For those of you who are paying attention, we now have to say Class of 1919 because we used to just say Class of 19, but that would have been confusing. Okay, welcome. It's a great day to be here in New Hampshire, and I want to start by acknowledging a bit about us and about this place. The Hood Museum of Art and Dartmouth College are situated upon the ancestral and unceded lands of the Abenaki people. We take this moment to remind ourselves of the significance of place, the continued existence of Indigenous people, and the museum's and Dartmouth's commitment to building respectful relationships with those who call these lands home today. And so, today we do something truly special as our second celebration of our new home. Today we clear the decks and make room for artists to speak about their work and their ideas in long form. The entire day is dedicated to hearing from and listening to those who create works of art. Expect to be challenged and elated, to have your comfort zones threatened, and your sense of humanity and human connectivity increased. For this is what artists do with their work. They move us from one place to another without knowing, them or us, exactly where we'll start or where we'll end up. We learn from artists to embrace the productivity that we find in discomfort and reassurance from the same experience in mixed doses. Today we get to hear about our museum and by extension all art museums from the consummate and literal insiders. No one is more inherent to an art museum than the makers who created the works we display. That said, and despite their imperative role as creators, artists are seldom in control of the fate of their works. Museums select the neighborhoods, the households, and even the roommates for every artist. By neighborhoods, I mean the museum geography where the work is situated, the North American wing, the contemporary art project space, the decorative arts study storage area, the Art of Africa galleries. So much is suggested by where we put things and what we call those places. And by households, I mean the specific galleries that a work occupies. How has that gallery been conceived? Every gallery tells a story. So what is that story? And how does the singular work of art contribute to that story? And finally, by roommates, I mean adjacency. Which artworks are placed into direct contact with one another? Are they happy together? Or is the relationship strained? It's impossible to deny the it is impossible to deny the power of proximity. And today we have artists who all belong to the Hood family, who all live in the neighborhood of the Hood Museum of Art, So what is that like, individually and collectively? That's why we're here. We're here to hear from the artists, not just about their work, but about their work here and what it is like to join this accidental family. And now, in the last moment before we start our proceedings, I want to mention that this conference is the second of our opening year's celebrations. In late October, we will hold the third and final major event, the New Now Art Museums in the Future. Will feature an amazing roster of contemporary arts professionals who will discuss the pressing issues shaping the museum field today, from conservation to repatriation. I hope you can all come back and join us next fall. Now, please welcome Jessica Hong, our new curator of global contemporary art, who will get things started. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's really nice to see you all. As John mentioned, my name is Jessica Hong. I'm the Associate Curator of Global Contemporary Art here at the Hood Museum, and I started this past January, so I'm very new, and I'm delighted to be kicking off today's panel sessions. Before I do, I want to echo John's sentiments and acknowledge my incredible colleagues at the Hood who work tirelessly behind the scenes to manifest this program and all programs and exhibitions that you've experienced since the reopening. It takes a village to do anything, so also want to extend my thanks to the facilities, safety and security, tech and media staff, conference and events, and all of the departments, on campus that make Dartmouth run. I want to thank you and the audience for choosing to be with us today for this symposium, and of course, my warmest thanks to all of the artists. Thank you for the generosity of your work, your time, and energy. It is a privilege to live with your work, and I'm honored to be sharing the stage with you today. So regarding the format of this session, each of the artists will present on their work and practice. Afterward, the four of us will have a conversation, and we'd love to hear any questions you have in the audience, so we'll open it up to the audience for questions in the last portion. Before we embark, I wanted to quickly set the tone for this conversation. When I express the term global contemporary, the main question people ask is, what does that mean? On its face, global contemporary could mean what is happening around the world at this present moment. Easy enough? But how does one truly grasp the entire world, holistically and equitably, when it is comprised of diverse cultures and communities, when we're typically tied to a particular context, and when the present often encompasses past histories as well as unrealized yet potential futures? So to be frank, I don't have a concise definition, nor do I think one actually exists. This question of what it means I also find interesting, as it reveals this deep-seated impulse to categorize, which can be helpful, absolutely, but it can also have fraught consequences, such as pigeonholing, stereotyping, creating hardline ideological borders, and closing in possibilities of inquiry and experimentation. When I get this question, I often turn it around on the questioner and ask, what do you think it means? I ask not to deflect, though if I'm honest, it's a partial deflection, but because I see the responsibility of understanding this term as a collaborative one. There is no way that one person can inhabit and tend to the entire world. I realize and accept that I am a singular individual with certain subjectivities, and in my role as a global contemporary art curator, I can turn to the expertise that is abound on campus, the artists that I work with, colleagues and publics I engage with, and I'm always open to hearing different thoughts, expressions, and experiences, and especially as we're here today, hope you all feel similarly. This morning, we may provide more questions than answers, but conversing, questioning, even interrogating are critical starting points to any issue at hand. Each of the artists joining me on stage encompasses this term global contemporary in expansive and distinct ways, which you will hear more about in depth during the presentations. And I will introduce each of the artists right before they speak. So our first speaker is Lalla Essaydi, currently lives between New York, Boston, and Marrakesh. And I'm going to provide just very brief bios because I can spend the whole day kind of listing the accolades of each artist. But her work has been exhibited at institutions including the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art in DC, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and the Iris and B. Gerald Cantor Center for the Visual Arts at Stanford University. Her work is represented in numerous institutional collections, including the Art Institute of Chicago, Brooklyn Museum of Art, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, British National Museum London, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, National Gallery of Art in DC, as well as the Louvre Museum. She received her BFA at Tufts University and MFA at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, which is now part of Tufts as well. Please welcome to the stage, Lalla Essaydi.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us and for allowing us to share our art with your community. I will start by presenting my work, document my own experience growing up as an Arab woman within, going right or, yeah. As an Arab woman, growing up as an Arab woman within Islamic culture, spending my childhood and adolescence in Morocco and living as an adult in Saudi Arabia for many years, helped me gain a great understanding of the importance of architectural space in Islamic culture. In my photographs, I explore this space, whether mentally or physically, and interrogate the role it's played in gender identity making. For instance, my images of women embedded in Islamic culture recognize and represent an alternative to similar spaces as imagined for Arab women in painting and photography from within the Arab and Muslim worlds. My fusion of photography, of calligraphy as a sacred traditional reserved for men, and henna, an adornment worn and applied by women, similarly reduces artist traditions and everyday practices in Islamic culture while transgressing gender roles and the boundaries between private and public spaces. As an artist who lives and work in the West, I also engage Islamic culture and art from a different perspective. Most notably, my painting and photography challenges stereotypical representation of Arab and Muslim women in the West. My training in painting allows me to directly converse with Orientalist painters' appropriate notions of the harem and the veil and undermine their distorted and degrading view of the Eastern way of life. Because of this, my work belonged to a new wave that brings Islamic art a global stage and challenges the idea that Islamic culture is remote and exotic. My approach to art in general, as my relation to Islamic art in particular, is deeply rooted in my personal experience. As a Moroccan-born artist who lives in Boston, New York, and Marrakesh, as well as traveling frequently in the Arab world, I have become deeply aware of how the culture of the so-called Orient and Occident view one another. In particular, I have become increasingly aware of the impact of Western gaze on Arab culture. Edward Said famously described the dominant Western take on Arab culture in his groundbreaking book, Orientalism. Although Orientalism most often suggests 19th century European vision of the East as a set of assumptions, it lives on today, both in the gaze of the West and in the way Arab society continues to internalize and respond to that gaze. Because in its early form, Orientalism was a literal vision finding expression in the work of Western painters who traveled to the exotic East in search of cultures more colorful than their own. I have used it as a point of departure in most of my work, in both painting and photography. The imagery I found in Orientalist paintings has resonated with me in a tricky ways, and it ultimately helped me situate my own experience in a powerful visual language. As I address you today, I am hoping this complex of ideas we call Orientalism, as reflected in my work, and the Western painting that inspired it, would serve to ground my remarks. While the overtly sensational and often sexualized images commonly found in Orientalist representation of the East appear nowadays replaced by a form of more subtle signifier of difference, the legacies of early depictions of the Arab world still inform contemporary Western perception of the region. These historical images also continue to influence in the ways in which contemporary artists like myself construct our own identities, sometimes working in strict opposition to the reductive stereotypes, sometimes appropriating Orientalist imagery in order to subvert yet deeply held cultural expectations. In a world in which many of the Orientalist tropes continue to dominate contemporary depictions in films and popular media, and often set the term for political analysis, my work aims to provide viewers with an understanding of the history of these visuals and the tools to rearrange critically the narratives they support. However, I would like to begin by emphasizing that my relation to the Orientalist tradition is a complicated one. I am able to appreciate the beauty of the Western painters found in Morocco, Egypt, and in other Arab countries, which they rendered in such a loving detail. And at the same time, I cringe at the distorted and degrading view of the Eastern way of life, as portrayed in their work and most strikingly in their presentation of Arab women. I can simultaneously regret how their demeaning imagery imprinted itself on the society they depicted, and at the same time believe that we are responsible for freeing ourselves from imposed identities and seeing ourselves with our own eyes. Before embarking on a presentation of my work and its relation to the Orientalist tradition, let me note that I am an artist and that my work is inspired by my personal history. The many territories that converge in my work are not just geographical ones, but territories of the imagination, shaped above all by childhood and by memory, by invisible influences. I cannot presume to speak for all Arab women, nor can I reduce my work to an Orientalist discourse. Orientalism has given me a lens through which to focus on the converging territories of my work, and through which to see more clearly the influence of the Western imagination in the Eastern ways of conceptualizing the self. My work is haunted by space, actual and metaphorical, remembered and constructed. My photograph grew up of the need I felt to document actual spaces of my childhood. At a certain point, I realized that in order to grow up, to move forward as an artist, it was necessary for me to return physically to my childhood home in Morocco and to document this world, which I had left in a physical sense, but never, of course, fully in a more deeper one, more psychological one. In order to understand the woman I had become, I needed to re-encounter the child I once was. The house I returned to is now an occupied space, a space of memory, but returning here, I discovered another space, the one which I inhabit now, that of an artist. I was bringing with me a new perspective of having lived in the West, and the only space in which these different territories, East and West, past and present, could be brought together was in the internal space of the imagination of self-creation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lalla. That was incredible. If you don't excuse me, I'm flipping through to Sin-ying's, and we get to see more of Lalla's work, which is actually great. Yeah? Oh, I have to go the other way. Oh my gosh. This is why I'm not in tech. Apologies. Okay. Our next speaker is Geoffrey Gibson, who is based in Hudson, New York. He currently has 2 solo museum exhibitions traveling, Like a Hammer, organized by the Denver Art Museum, and This is the Day, organized by the Wellen Museum at Hamilton College. Other solo exhibitions include The Anthropophagic Effect at the New Museum in New York, Look How Far We've Come at the Haggerty Museum of Art in Milwaukee, Geoffrey Gibson Speak to Me at Oklahoma Contemporary Art Center, and A Kind of Confession at the Savannah College of Art and Design Museum. Gibson will take part in this year's Whitney Biennial, which is opening up very, very soon, and has upcoming exhibitions at MASMOCA, the National Portrait Gallery, Museu d'Art Contemporani de Barcelona, and the Brooklyn Museum. He received his BFA from the Art Institute of Chicago and Master's at the Royal College of Art in London. He is also a member of the faculty at Bard College. Please welcome to the stage, Geoffrey Gibson.
Good morning. Thank you all to everyone who is responsible for bringing us all together today. So I'm actually not going to show any images of my work. I don't know if you've had a chance to see the sculpture that's upstairs. And on a number of pieces, I work with material called a jingle, and it is similar to what you're looking at on the dress here, but it's one of the questions that I get most often is, what is it and why do I use it? And so I thought I'd spend today thinking about that in terms of the global contemporary. And a couple of thoughts that I've had. I think whenever we're talking about the contemporary, oftentimes we're speaking to young people. And I think the idea that the now moment is really what they're paying attention to the most, sometimes needs to be expanded and deepened to include the past and also conversations about the future. And that's something that I've had to learn over a very, I would even say the last 25 years. When I was in the Art Institute, to talk about the contemporary then was always about what's in galleries now, what's in museums now, where is technology now. And the last 25 years I've really spent trying to connect that back to history and try to, I suppose in many ways, justify my use of materials and the formats that I choose to work in. So I wanted to start with this. I'm assuming many people have not been to a powwow before, but a powwow is something that starts in the 19th century. It's really after relocation as a means for tribes to reunite and come back together, and the idea of bringing strength and unity back to intertribal nations. And so there's, I suppose there's a couple of different origin stories of the jingle dress. This is a jingle dress here, late 19th, early 20th century. And right around the turn of the century, the story is that either a grandfather or a medicine man, and it was either his granddaughter or a young girl, was sick, and so he asked the ancestors for a vision to help save her. And the vision was this dress, and this dress had an accompanying dance. And so when he awoke from his vision, he shared with the women that this was a dance, this dress had to be made, and they began dancing. And so the healing sound, the dance, at this point, many people would refer to the jingle dress dance as sacred and ceremonial. It becomes really popular in the 1920s through the 1950s, and then it kind of disappears, not disappears entirely, but became popular again in the 1980s when Native American powwows became much more popular again. And so you'll see, as I go through this, why that's important. So I found this footage from the 1950s of a powwow in Cass Lake, Minnesota, by, I don't know, Tommy Jude, but I'm just going to let you watch this. And you'll see a number of dancers, You'll see the jingle dress dancers there in the back. So the dress actually hasn't changed so much. It's actually quite difficult to find footage or even photographs of early jingle dress dancers. But what's interesting to me is really that powwow has, the dances are rooted in tradition and very specific cultural tradition, but what powwow allows for is evolution and for people to begin to author kind of new ways that traditions can exist. So I found this on I found this on YouTube. And this was Tommy Jude's family footage. And when I started reviewing the notes, this was the first one. So wow, that's my grandmother at 28 seconds. I just showed her, would you have any additional photos, videos from this? And so when I was thinking about the global contemporary, I'm thinking about how images, how information, how relationships build across the medias that we have today. And it's not so much about trying to define what the contemporary is and I think it's what makes the contemporary difficult. You're not actually in control of it. You're a witness, and you're hopefully a very careful listener and a very careful observer. You can remove your ego enough to watch and just to accept without judgment what's happening in front of you. And that's really the challenge of the contemporary, because there's no way of determining that it's going to become important or that it's going to stick around for longer than a minute. So when I think about the jingle, I was thinking about, well, how did we arrive at me using the jingle? Why is it important for me to use? This is where I get my jingles from. This is a website called crazycrow.com. And crazycrow.com was started by a non-native man named Rex Reddit. Rex Reddit's wife, Ginger, is a member of the Comanche tribe. And they have 2 daughters, and they all perform in the powwow as a traditional dancer and jingle dress dancers. What I think is interesting about this is it takes every kind of philosophical, critical critique about distribution, production, manufacturing, all of this kind of stuff that I learned and studied in art school. And he's turned it into, one important fact. Originally, the jingles would have been the lids of snuff and tobacco containers that were cut off of the containers and then turned to adorn the dresses. So something totally non-native, non-indigenous, being used to support the culture of the tribes, and an invented kind of dance moving forward. So here, he's decided it has to have a feather, right? It has to have the state Missouri River snuff. It has to have American, and since 1832. So this reproduction of something, and it's no longer even made in the same materials. These are made from tin with a coating, and they come in copper, gold, or silver. And they also come in large, medium, and small. And the other thing that's interesting to me about them, so this is the options that you can buy. The other thing that's interesting is he has them patented, and they are all produced in Taiwan. And so they follow exactly the kind of contemporary route of production and distribution that we're dealing with in the world today. So this question, when people ask me, is it traditional? I always immediately say, no, it's not. These are not traditional. But it also is in hopes of invoking questions about what that means and why the traditional can't be contemporary. And also, over the years, it's made me think that, there's some comfort in being fetishized. There's a lot of comfort in being kind of cherished and given space because you're fetishized. So the minute you begin to step outside of that and I become more like you, I also lose your interest in fetishizing me as an indigenous person. And I think there's something really powerful about doing that. So I try to kind of move back and forth very quickly between all of them. So in terms of thinking about distribution, about how all of this kind of cultural influence, materials are moving around and kind of touching each other, this is the 2018 powwow map from powwows.com. So you can see how many powwows happen annually and across the entire country. And this is just the United States. So it goes much further than this. The other thing I think is interesting, and one of the reasons why I use the jingle, is because it marks a globalism. It marks a production that happens overseas. It's also an incredibly niche market. There is no other purpose served by a jingle other than the dancers. And now my work. We order them by the thousands annually every year. And Another important thing is, of course, that within the powwow context, jingles are gendered. So they would be only worn by women, and it is a female dance specifically. And so that's another question that I've received. And so for me, what evolved out of that question was, I think for Indigenous artists and for many artists, there needs to be a distinction between cultural practice and art making, because cultural practice serves to support the continuance and survival of a culture. Art making, you're meant to challenge, you're meant to question, you're meant to kind of confuse and throw things in people's face. It's the allowance of that which makes contemporary art interesting for me. And so, so that discussion also has to exist separately, and at times, of course, kind of cross over and challenge each other. So, here is the 2018 Denver March Powwow, and I'm just gonna show you, these are incredible dancers. There is a difference between, there's great dancers, and then there's new dancers. And one of the things is that, so when a young girl is being trained to dance and she's coming up, when they're really little, you see their jingles kind of go in every direction. And a really incredible dancer, you'll just see the jingles move in unison, and they make this incredible sound. So I just want to show you an example of that. Okay, so, I tried to sneak in another slide this morning that is my fault that it's not there. But I wanted to talk about other ways that this dance and this material has moved around. And during the North Dakota Access Pipeline protests, there were a number of jingle dress dancers who showed up and danced on the front line of the protest. So I wanted to show you that as an example of also how this material is being charged culturally in a contemporary context. Also, I would say really in the last, what's been going on, I would say since the 70s and 80s, that there has been LGBTQ presence within the Native community and organized. But specifically, LGBTQ powwows have been showing up over the last, I would say, 5-10 years. And so here's an image from the second annual Two-Spirit Powwow in Winnipeg. And this was 2018. So, and I think it's just, you know, what's really happening here is there's a blurring of so many things, but there's a distinction between it being identified outside the community and then, of course, being identified within the community. And I think for me, they're equally as important. I mean, I certainly appreciate the acknowledgement of my work as an artist. But it's when it comes from the community that it takes on just a completely different kind of resonance for me. And here's the grand entry for the 2019. So I'm going to stop there, and I look forward to questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. Our last speaker for this panel is artist Sin-ying Ho, who is based in Queens, New York. She has exhibited at international venues such as the Incheon Women's Artist Biennial in Korea, Great China Museum in Qingshedan, China, Glenbow Museum in Alberta, Canada, Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Taipei County Yingge Ceramics Museum in Taiwan, and is in the collections of the Burlington Arts Center in Ontario, Tsinghua University in Beijing, as well as the Qingshedan Ceramics Institute, where I believe Ho studied for a term as an undergraduate. Were you there? Yes, okay. She received her BFA from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, MFA from Louisiana State University, and is currently assistant professor in the art department of Queens College City University in New York. Please welcome to the stage Sin-ying Ho.
So thank you for everyone coming here today. And so when I got this topic about global contemporary, so I'm kind of looking to my work very closely. And I find that actually that my work tells about the journey of the global contemporary. So let me just start with a slide first. So I wanted to set the tone of the talk that I show you the slides of two historical ceramics plates. One is on the left-hand side is a majolica that made in the 15th century. And then the other one on the right-hand side is the export ware that is made in the 18th century. So when we're looking at contemporary, global contemporary, which is I'm very agree with Geoffrey. We have to look back in the history. So this is not just only like talking, like I only have 10 minutes to talk, so I cannot talk about like, since we have a civilizations, we invented fire and then clay, then we already started recording our human behavior and how we travel, how the war, how we trade and get marriage to make our world together. So, so now I'm going to talk about my background of myself. So I born in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is a British colony. So my identity is already being questioned when I was born. So one thing I found is very interesting. This piece is called Identity. So my Chinese names in Cantonese is pronounced Ho Sin-ying. But when I moved to North America, that my last name have to go to the last, so my name becomes Sin-ying Ho. And I also have a name called Cassandra, which is when I go to school, because I born in Hong Kong, I grew up there for like 29 years before I moved to North America. So my English name was required by my English teacher, so it has to be sounds like Western. So I call myself Alex, so Alice first, but then the name was too, everyone called it in my class, we have 4 schoolmates called Alice at the same time. So, and then I went home and asked my sister, please give me a name that nobody can pronounce it and so long cannot spell. So this is when I was 13, so that's why I adopted my name as Cassandra. And then it is on my Hong Kong identification card, so I'm still a Hong Kong identity as a permanent residence. But I moved to Canada, so I have a Canadian passport. And then as well as when I was studying in the United States, now I'm here as a citizen, I have a green card. So myself have a lot of identity that kind of weave it into my lively life. So it's a journey that kind of reflect what is going on. But I don't want to neglect it, and I wanted to investigate about what my identity is like from China. And then porcelain, China is a double meaning of the country of China. But then when you read in the Chinese, it means that the medium kingdom. So it's nothing about like porcelain. So we have been like the country was looking at the perspective from the Western point of view. So this is a detail about like the work that I embedded, all those symbols, and then my name, Sin-ying Ho, Cassandra, it's all embedded into my painting. So I'm looking into language because English is my second language, so I'm really nervous now. So even though I'm living here and then still I have that kind of like nervousness. So Chinese is written graphically, is in history that is written from right to left vertically. And then later on it was changed to like horizontally from left to right. So I think maybe the printing changing. So I'm kind of incorporated with that kind of a graphic and with vertical and then horizontal, how things that kind of weave together. This piece is called gibberish. So now we're not just only connected with both languages for my life, but then also computer languages. So things that the gibberish and these computer code that which cannot be identified because my computer at that time, 10 years ago, doesn't have that kind of capability to translate it with the message that's sent from Hong Kong in Chinese. So in a way that we thought that we were being connected, but we are not in the same time. So this is detail of these gibberish. And 101 for the computer language code. And then I also like working with like the symbols, like the blessing, the bat in Chinese is mean blessing, but then in the Western country, which is mean bat is a really bad luck. But in China, it's good luck, blessing. And so I determined that to do the piece that with continue with the hand painting as well as a decal transfer. So incorporated with the painting, and that traditionally has been done since at least 16th century in China. So the Chinese character is called Daiji, which is plenty of luck. So when you get closer, you can see that the Chinese characters is formed by English and then play with all the international signage. So even when we're in trouble, we're getting in dangers, we can see the signage that we don't get close to it. So stay away from trouble. And good luck. So one thing that I moved to North America, that identity of being a woman, also being a racist in my everyday life. In Hong Kong, we do talk about it, but not that it's popular. But then when I go to art school in North America, you have to talk about feminine arts. So then I said, okay, so let me look into history, how women being portrayed on the ceramic ware, so that the one that on one side is in Majolica, the Bella, then the other side is the Chinese. When you look at the painting, you usually see how they look like, and then juxtaposed with Barbie and Wonder Woman. And I think this piece is collected by the Hood Museum as well. Thank you. And then also looking into like ideology. So when I was in Hong Kong, in the 70s and 80s, I listened to the music of John Lennon, Imagine. And then, but also, I grew up with like Confucius kind of value, and I wasn't really aware of it until I moved to North America. And then also I was Christians when I was in high school. So all this ideology is in my mind is kind of like intertwines and weave together so that I create a pharmacy jar, which is coming from the form of a bella. It's a pharmacy jar for Italian kind of ceramics. So this piece is called Confucius, Jesus Christ, and John Lennon. And it also inspired by a play that written by Artisan, which is the Chinese playwright. So this is on the other side of it, so that they change the role. So I'm also looking at the popular culture and music. So I myself was an actress before, so I dealing with like performance and music all the time. And I do Cantonese opera. And so I was just thinking about how could I use message and then images of Britney Spears, because at that time in the 90s, that which is really, really popular. And then so I created this piece called Music and Play. So that's the Barbie card that I got it from Walmart. And then after I'm kind of like working with a classical form, so I decided that I'm actually very fragmented from all of those culture, particularly juxtaposed between the East and West. So I cut my vessel and then put it back together to make that kind of metaphor. So, and then I work with symbols from Mayan culture, from Roman culture, Chinese, and then incorporate with our digital age with all these unidentified code. And this is another piece using that 5 major kind of civilizations, and then create a piece called binary code. So they have Egypt, Greek, Roman, Celtic, Chinese symbols are involved in that piece. So in the 80s, then popular culture between like E.T. and Charlie Brown and Hello Kitty. So which is like, I'm thinking about, like, I grew up with like Journey to the West, okay? And like the Monkey King, like that kind of famous kind of literature. And then now I'm dealing with all these different images that is in my livelihood, not livelihood, in my life when I grew up. So that's a close-up. E.T. And also in the 70s that we don't have TV at home, so we only just go to neighbors and watch the sports. And then we already see like Muhammad Ali, okay, they're fighting for the boxing. And then also Bruce Lee at that time, which he also represented in the West Coast for the civil right and fight for the right for the Asian. And then Muhammad Ali was fight for the civil rights. And then, so I thought that it was be interesting that to put dragon and tiger together. So this piece is called Crouching Tiger and Hidden Dragon. It's a movie. So, and then working in the imageries, and so I look into like postmodernists, you know, the Chinese, when they're doing the dragon, it's actually passed on from generation to generation. So at that time, we don't have appropriation, we just learn from the master. And then now, and then we have the postmodernists, so that we kind of incorporate with different images. So I have like Andy Warhol is part of the compositions. And then after that, I'm kind of like travel a lot between China and then US. And then finally that I find a studio that I can work a huge, 7 feet tall, 5 feet tall to 7 feet tall kind of a vessel and incorporate it in different images. So this is how my studios is in China. So the topic about global contemporary, which is physically that I'm kind of really moving back and forth. I don't know how global it is, but this is how I conduct my art productions. So, and then I go back to the human traits about without any kind of east or west, but then I also incorporate with Adam and Eve into my work. And in 2008, because of the economic crisis, so I was talking about how that stock markets influence our life. So I embedded with all the stock market index into my work, juxtaposed with the Garden of Eden. But that the garden is more my imaginative garden, and then the flowers is 100 flowers blossom, which is very popular. That I use it as a symbol instead of just a flower itself. So I also, this piece is called Transformation. So human beings are kind of living with the technology, so that embedded with all these motherboard chips. This piece is called Temptation and Temptation, Lives of Goods, like in commodity. Language, so this is 46 languages that I can find from Google. One world, many peoples. I have to go a little more faster, so I'm not going to go for details. And this is a recent kind of a commission work that was done for Singapore, so that the images that is embedded is to tell the life in Singapore. So my work is also doing in an outdoor garden, so you can see the scale. And this is another piece that I'm going to work with all these images is from like the earliest Paleolithic kind of images to blue and white, to language, to numbers. And working with a 3D model, 3D Max to do this design, and then this is how it works for the installations. So technologies kind of helped me to generate my idea. And physically, I also like travel and then doing exhibition. This is the one in Basel, Miami, and the other one is Hong Kong, Basel. So not just me travel, but I bring my work, carry it on my back. So this is the shot that I have exhibitions last year in Hood downtown. So I was really lucky and then and engaged with the students. And the 4 day was so fruitful for my career as well. Thank you. Okay, so this is what I'm up to. So I'm just going to a little more faster, okay? And then this is where I'm working now. I'm building with a gigantic sculpture. And this is how it's finished and being shown in Hong Kong. And dealing with gold leaf, with the elements of water, metal, wood, and gold and fire. And this is a piece that actually is inspired by the policy right now in China. It's called One Belt, One Road, which is echoing the Silk Road. That's a close-up. And that's what I'm up to. Thank you.
I'm right here? Okay.
And you sit there?
Yes.
Sit here.
Hey, maybe we could have the lights on? Or can you see us? No? Okay. Hi. Hi, everyone. Wow, thank you all for your presentations. It really provided amazing insights into your thought process, and I think it raised a lot of thought-provoking questions, which I will be sure to have enough time for questions afterward. But I thought I'd kind of start off by asking, and clearly from your presentations, there's so much embedded in all of your practices. It seems to really embrace hybridity, and I think that there's also a lot embedded in the term global, as we kind of touched upon, and Geoffrey, you also mentioned about how much is embedded in the contemporary itself. Because you combine multiple references, cultures, traditions, and temporalities, which I feel like your work kind of eschews these either-or binaries. And I think that these terms that we're using, global and contemporary, also inhabits this ambiguous space, as it's difficult to kind of pin down. So I'd love to kind of have you speak about, functioning within this ambiguous realm, kind of what you face, perhaps even the challenges.
Me?
Or anybody.
Oh, sorry.
Anybody, yeah. I actually would love all of you to speak to that.
It is sometimes a lonely place, and it has a feeling that is very difficult to cope with, but at the same time there is a deeper understanding of who we are, and who we could be if we allow ourselves to investigate that space. It is about honesty, and I think being an artist is about being honest. It's about human experience, about emotions, and about how to communicate. So,
we're talking about sort of being in institutional context, or?
Well, you can. I mean, you can talk about that too. That's also an interesting question as well. Kind of like how.
I mean, I really work really hard to keep my personal life and my professional life separate, and I love museums. I've grown up going to museums. And people who've spoken to me will hear me say oftentimes that I feel like I really use the art world to do what it is I hope to achieve. Especially the way the art world works now, it's, through popular publications, monthly blogs, image distribution. I mean, and it's kind of technology allows for a meeting point between all of the kind of binary spectrums, even when it comes to, youth on reservations being able to see my work, whether it's through Instagram or Facebook. I think it's important. For me, I feel very comfortable using that. So personally, I enjoy it.
So I'm always in between. And I think that kind of space, which is allowed me to examine things around me and also how I conduct my life. And it's very difficult sometimes because there's no answer about where the in-between space is, because it's going back and forth. And I think the evolution, which like in the work that I'm trying to use the imageries, is try to really kind of look into the evolutions of our humanity, that how things change and how I travel, and then what the things is around me that changing. So I think I'm still really have that, because I'm travel in very two different systems in US and in China. So every time, like 3 months in China, when I coming back here for another 3 months and going there for 3 months, I still have cultural shock. But my husband, he's Caucasian, and then he said, no, I'm just taking 15 minutes, hours to China, just like Flushing. And I think that is really, we negotiate very different things. For me, because I understand the language I was dealing with, you know, the socialist, capitalist China, as well as democracy in here. So, and the in-between space, but also a really strong kind of juxtapose with two systems. It's kind of really confused me, but on the other hand, it's really exciting. So I'm always stay, I think, I cannot find the answer for the rest of my life. I stay fragmented. And I just have to deal with it and then make a whole for myself.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Can I add
Yeah,
one thing?
yeah.
So I may have misunderstood the question. I think, I mean, the in-between space, and especially, I've been an educator for 20 years at this point, and teaching young artists, one of the hardest things is to get them to trust being in an in-between space and not make work from the fixed points, because the fixed points gives you this temptation that the audience is gonna like it. And I'm like, your job as an artist is really to build this muscle to be able to sustain these in-between spaces, because it's where you're gonna exist most often. And that's, for me, kind of become like the test of whether somebody's gonna endure being an artist or not. And you have to feel like you can thrive and go incredibly deep, and it's not sustainable. You have to come back up. But then when you come back up, it's almost like you appreciate those fixed points a little bit more. And hopefully maybe something that you found really far down deep kind of rises to the top as a fixed point. And not for the masses, but maybe just for the few who need it.
When you say fixed point, do you mean kind of the artist's kind of perspective, or?
No, I think what I mean is sort of the kind of communicable ways that we define things, you know, as sort of like we can agree upon this means this, you know. Although we might know it's gonna evolve into something different in the future, for now it's helpful for us to be able to communicate with each other.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I feel like that's the tension, I think. Oh, sorry, did you want to say something? No.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what Jeremy just said. I think it's very important. The rhetoric is so decisive, and it is so important that we have stories that reminds us of how difficult it is to build bridges, and how difficult also for artists to create networks from that space. You know, living between so many different cultures, it's you know, you don't know where you find yourself and how you could react. And if you're accepted by these spaces, I mean, when I'm in Morocco, I lived such a long time in Saudi Arabia, and when I'm in Morocco, they tell me, in your country, meaning Saudi Arabia, and when I am in Saudi Arabia, in your country, meaning Morocco, and then you have the United States now, and it's, you know, like you have to just accept it. It used to be very difficult how to function from that space, but I think it becomes a space on its own. It becomes like a nationality on its own, and to tell you the truth, that space in the middle is where I find myself personally. It's in my work, because I feel I'm a foreigner any other places I go, because I'm not living in that culture 100%. I'm scattered, I'm everywhere. So the only place I can find myself is within my work.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because I often find that I think that it's really important to kind of be within this ambiguous space, differentiating between ambiguous and neutral space. Yes. Neutrality, I think, is a kind of farce that it's a blank kind of slate, but often even within the museum institution, I consider it as an ambiguous space because it encompasses so many different political histories, social and cultural histories, colonial histories, and so this is kind of the situation that we're in, and trying to have these conversations, you know, contemporaneously. And so, but we try to kind of be in an relatively open or ambiguous space, but oftentimes there is this pressure to really define. So I think, but Geoffrey, you were saying that it is important to have a communicable way to kind of talk about these things as a way to either place where you are within a conversation, not necessarily geographically, but kind of the tension then of really trying to kind of focus and really concretize kind of whether it's identity or kind of why, but so that tension between leaving something open but the desire to really define. I don't know if that's, I mean, it's not necessarily a question, but I feel like it kind of is a question, because that's I feel like that's like the work that we do, and it seems to be a lot of your work is kind of negotiating that, or having to negotiate that when you're entering into different institutional spaces, and kind of maybe speaking a little bit about that and your experiences.
Is the question?
Yeah.
So really keep
Whatever.
open.
I think that personally, when the work is completed, it has a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
So when it's in a museum or within a specific exhibition, it has a different connotation and a different meaning every time that it is exhibited somewhere different. I don't think of it as my work personally anymore, because it has a life of its own. It has so many other projections from viewers, from the location where it is, from the art it's juxtaposed to. So it's a different feel to it. It's another space, you know, like it's, and my work is informed by space to start with.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, like it's either geographical or it's always, space is a very important element in my work.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'm directly answering the question.
Yeah,
I
that's
just have
fine.
a thought that, like, I've been travel. I spent some time in Canada, Australia, and America. So these three countries are immigrants, formed by immigrants. And then when I go over there for these three countries, I feel like very global, because there are so many different ethnic people live together. But then when I was in China, they also have a lot of ethnic people there too. But then they already, kind of throughout all the history, they already have the evolutions about like the Hanju. They have 59 minority in China. And then I think that when you look in that perspective, it's actually they're also forming with a different, you know, at that time may not be a global yet, but then the minority that kind of living in one country. And then now it's evolution that to become, they're all just being, you know, neutralized. Everyone is Chinese, but it's not. When you talk to them, they have their own dialects. And then they have their own living kind of habits and traditions. And so I'm just kind of thinking about like what we're living in now. We're talking about global contemporary. And now are we looking into like, you know, the country that have more of those new immigrants and coming in to form the country. So, and then we can see visually that which is really quite different. So I'm just thinking about it, what that kind of, for me, living in this space and how it's kind of impact my work.
I mean, when it comes to contemporary art, I think it's I always tell people it's like, you know, the amazing thing is it's just like a big experiment, you know, and no one really knows what's going to stick. And if you look historically at art, for some reason I took on a 30-year kind of snapshot where I thought if something's still around in 30 years, then it probably is representative of the moment when it was made. You know, if we think about right now in terms of like the state of immigration, the way we define race, the way we define gender, and all the capabilities of what those things could be, it's scary. I'm always shocked when I talk to my nieces and nephews who are in high school, and I wonder how the current political state is being described to them, or you know, other students. I know I don't know if Dartmouth has this situation, but on undocumented students and sort of how they navigate this privilege, you know, sort of how privilege works within an institution. And I think for many of the artists who I know, we kind of inherited this situation of hybridity. You know, it wasn't a choice. And so a lot of the strategies to try to navigate it are really based in is kind of survival and finding a voice. It's not the other option was to disappear and be silent.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think my work oftentimes comes across as being hopeful, beautiful, well-crafted. It has a reserve to it. But the period of my life where I was out of control and angry was in my 20s. So people are meeting me now at a point of having figured out a number of strategies to deal with that.
Yeah.
But I certainly understand the kind of levels that happen on my way there.
Yeah, and Geoffrey, in your presentation, it really struck me when you talked about how kind of fetishization provides a kind of relevance and a power, but it also it implies a particular positionality of who, or an authority of who is allowed to provide that kind of relevance. But it's interesting to then how does one then what are kind of your strategies on the subverting fetishization? And even Lalla, you talked about this too, about kind of subverting these Orientalist notions as well. So kind of using these really detrimental and not just terminologies, but ideas that have been so ingrained, and kind of their strategies to subvert that, which is something I think that a lot of us are really attempting to do.
We'll tag team on this.
It is very difficult also because there is a lot of resistance to what we're trying to do. And the resistance comes not only from the West. It's true, I want to have a dialogue with people who are very familiar with this kind of type of art. Oh, sorry. And but the challenge is actually within the Arab world itself. And my problem is the dialogue is not, there is a lot of resistance to it. And so if I want to make them understand that what I'm doing in a way, it's good for the culture, but they don't see it that way. They see it that I'm using women and I'm using Arab women when they are not supposed to be seen in public, and I am exhibiting that work in public spaces. And also I come from a very conservative family, and a lot of people now are starting to accept my work in the Arab world, but there won't be an open dialogue, but they look at the work, and when I try to engage them, they just say, well, the work is beautiful, and that's it. It stops there. They don't want to go further because of the subject matter, because of the women in the photographs. My family, they don't even, it's like this big elephant in the room. They don't want to talk about it. And I try to approach them. I try to have a dialogue with them. My latest book, I worked for 2 years, and I brought the book, put it on the table, and I asked them, do you want to see it? And, they changed the subject, and we talked about something else. The book was there for 3 weeks. No one of them even opened that book. I mean, it's very difficult to work in an atmosphere like that. And so I just have to do what I have to do as an artist, because I need to do it, even if I'm not understand it right now, but maybe in the future, I have hopes. And here in the West, a lot of people don't see that those paintings were actually a fantasy. A lot of people believe that was the reality, so I have to deal with that as well and try to explain it. And that's what I'm trying to do.
So I think that's very interesting as well, because when you talk about your work was not being accepted in Arabic world, same as my work too. They don't understand it. So I think that maybe this is the way that what we are living in as an artist, that coming from a different and grew up in different country. And then when we go back our hometown, our home country, we already no longer kind of clearly that part of them, but we try to make ourselves be a part of them, and then make them understand that that's what is the world that we're living in, the in-between space. And gradually, I hope one day they will understand it. I think that because we really geographically, and we're still living in really different value.
Yeah.
And then the value which is not being understanding at this point in both countries that what we are going through.
I just want to say, I think the thing about what I was talking about with the fetishism, growing up, I remember as a child, what you can kind of feel the expectations of somebody, and you want to do good. You want to be told that you did the right thing. So, the history of boarding schools, both my parents went to boarding schools, both my grandfathers were Southern Baptist ministers. So this kind of morality of Christianity, this kind of idea of class, of not being poor, moving from dirt floors to linoleum floors, to bigger houses, all of that stuff plays into sort of forming, I think, what I thought meant success or what I was supposed to do as a person. So the way that's kind of gifted to you, or given to you, not gifted, what's given to you as a means to getting there is to like perform. And if fetishism gives you an ability to move forward, it's very tempting. And so when you try to subvert that, it begins to feel like, well, who's going to understand what I do? Who's going to, for what I do, I mean, and it seems like for everybody, the production of these artworks is not something that you can plan for at the beginning of your career, because you have no idea how you're going to produce work. And I think for me, one of the drives was assuming that there were critical thinkers, there were writers, there were curators, there were museum directors growing up on the reservations who had not yet found their institution, right? So somebody like Jamie Powell is incredible. Hey, Jamie. She's amazing. And part of it is just the conversation I have with her. She understands what I'm talking about when I talk about this, and we can share kind of family stories about our aunts and our uncles and our grandfathers, about kind of the how and why, what's important to us now and what's challenging, and we can form a network, and we can create. I mean, there's so many things. I think just to talk about the term Indigenous or Native American, really what we're talking about is like over 500 distinct tribal nations, languages, cultural traditions. So I'm speaking from this moment of kind of intertribal aesthetics, but really the future for me would be about the specificity of those different tribal nations. That's an idealism that I'm not sure I'll see during my lifetime. But.
Well, I actually I don't always just be the one asking questions. I don't know if any of you had questions for each other, or not to put you on the spot, because otherwise I can also open it up to the audience. But we would love to open it up to the audience. Can we put the lights up a little bit just so I can see people? Oh, them, okay.
Thank you.
Joe?
I have a question, and that is, do you see yourselves, obviously you're artists, but do you see yourselves also as political activists in your art?
Oh, it's for me. Okay. I do think of myself as a feminist, and I think, but I'm not a militant. I come from a culture where you have to really be very careful how you approach the issue you're working with, especially if you are a woman and a woman artist, and a woman artist from an Arab world living in the West. So all these things, they have to be extremely careful. And I do believe that if you're shouting, no one is going to hear you. You really need to be more settled. And also I am an artist. What attracts me to art in the first place is aesthetic and how beautiful it is. And so for me, it's very important that the art has all these elements: the substance, the beauty, and so I would think that maybe I am an activist in a way, but in a very subtle way, as an artist.
I generally say that I'm not an activist because I'm not like frontline. I think of activism as being very frontline, very immediate. There's a reactionary element to it. But I will say over the last few years, I think everyone has a responsibility to speak up about things. So I've been trying to find ways to, the work has always had the politics of a personal relationship, you know, and in any relationship there's power, there's dominance, there's push and pull and tension. But certainly, I think artists are also formed somewhat by your audience and how the work is written about and where it's shown. And so institutions have, and I've allowed it, for them to focus more on the political aspects of the work. And in this moment, I feel good about that. And so especially with the biennial coming up, one of the pieces that I'll be showing, which is a new piece, is a flag that I've made for the lobby. So, and I would say it's impossible to not see that as having strong political content.
Yeah, I think no for me, because I think that there are much more, you know, people who do the work more, has a fun line and then say that I'm the activist. They do much better than me. So my work, it's cannot be avoided looking at it as being like a activist, because I have an interview like 10, 15, 12 years ago that asked me that is the work of being an activist, and I say I am political aware what's going on around me, but I won't say that I'm political activist because I'm not intended, you know, to speak in that particularly. But I'm sure that people see that people would. I'm living in a world which is really critical, that a lot of different voices and then opinion. And I think it's also, I'm kind of influenced by the Confucius and also the Buddhist thinking that I like to be in that kind of balance because I know one is going in the other extreme, things that is going to swing back for another extreme, so no ended. So how I conducted myself and my work, and then to nurturing that kind of that kind of thinking that I wanted to. But on the other hand, I wanted to also feedback and my observations and my life that in my imageries and my art making. So that's another voice as well.
And I also encourage, if there are any students in the audience, if they have questions, please raise your hand. But I saw you in the audience. Oh, do you mind waiting for the microphone just so that everyone can hear?
Hi, I'm Stella, and I'm from the Netherlands, so I hope I have enough American speech. I'm only 3 days here. But what is interesting for me, I am from the time that the 70s was important, so when you showed John Lennon, it was a remembrance of the time that global became a kind of word for trying to find a common language. It was a kind of hope about one world, one future, one whatever. But now what I see in your work, and that the emphasis on the roots and the emphasis on the differences become stronger. So I would ask, what means global for you? Is it something family with 1,000 faces, or are we maybe growing to more understanding, like all the 1,000 faces can be one dragon? Something like that. That's my question for you.
Well, I think I'll answer that. For me, when I think of global the same way I think of the World Wide Net. It is global in a sense that it is used everywhere, but this does not mean that it is universal in content and message. It allows us a free access and therefore a personal response to the world. So it's a community in a way. It's voices, it's the liberty and the possibility beyond the borders where we live or the culture where we are. And I don't, I am strongly against categorizing any arts practice based on nationalities or geographic locations, but I think for me there shouldn't be any barrier. The global is already exist. As artists, it should be one, and also just living in so many different cultures and being with other different artists from different world, I think that already in itself is what we are looking for and what we want to do, and how it became our family and it's no longer just local in one specific place. So it is a hopeful thing, and the communication, I think, and it's just having so many more people and so many more sharing the same values, sharing the same experiences, and bringing their own work into to more people.
I'm somebody who generally shies away from words, sort of like words that are circulating like this. Someone asked me in an interview the other day how I feel about the terms Native American and Indigenous and American Indian. So these are things I've had to deal with over the last 15 years. But I think global kind of falls somewhere into that category for me. And unfortunately, and I could be wrong in this, that when we say global, it sounds like we're talking about everybody that's non-white. And I think that's a downfall. And I think global has to include literally everybody, and that conversation has to allow itself to be that complex, and it should be challenging, and people should feel implicated in it. But the thing about contemporary art and institutions is they're not natural, they're totally manufactured, right? And they're manufactured to be able to handle conversations like this. We should all be able to disagree and walk away and still find ways to kind of cohabitate together and get along. But I think, so for me, when it go back to this question of American Indian, Native American, Indigenous, I think the use of the word Indigenous is strategic, but it's coming from within Indigenous cultures, putting it out there as a way to unify ourselves in terms of how people look at us. But it also grows our numbers immediately, because if I say the word Indigenous, I'm talking about all around the world Indigenous people. I'm not sure that global is doing that in the way that we think about it now, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think that very easily that we thought that global is going to homogeneous, harmonize, think everything together, but I think that's really dangerous as well, because, and then I don't think that it's going to happen that way. Maybe we're looking more similar, or they work more similar value, but there are a lot of subtle differences that among it. So if you really pay attention on it and not just give those kind of terminologies that kind of boundary us, we can find more rooms around us.
There was the first hand I saw was in the back there with the plaid shirt.
It was a very interesting presentation from all three of you. Thank you very much. I'm interested in the idea that as artists you are trying to communicate and bring together and bridge time and space. I wonder, how important do you think it is for artists, contemporary artists, to try and make it easier for the lay public to understand the story you're trying to tell?
I think maybe, I think you're tapping into something that's about to really be explored in these conversations, like the topic of time, because I think to talk about history is one thing, to talk about, cultural histories, aesthetic histories, trade histories. Time is such an abstract thing, right? And everybody has a relationship to it, but it's really, it makes me think about environmentalism a lot in terms of the necessity to talk about time and how these kind of, they're not ambiguous, but they are kind of ephemeral things, are equally as important as the physical and material things that surround us. So when I think about time, I don't know if this makes any sense, but lately I've been thinking about the amount of the rising cancer rates in the world. and the amount of materials that are around us. And then when you work in museums, one thing you think about is you're not allowed to put things that off-gas near organic materials because it deteriorates. And I was thinking how much we surround ourselves with materials that are off-gassing, and we are organic things. So when I think about time, that's how my brain starts going. So my job as an artist is to take advantage of the time and space that's been carved out for me, that I carve out for myself, to try to propose things that otherwise, in the way that daily time works, people aren't really thinking about creatively how these things are connecting and meeting with each other. And then, of course, to talk to other artists, to talk to scientists, to talk to designers, to talk to educators. Then there's this kind of team that gathers as a way to interpret. But that's another reason why I love institutions, though, is I can approach a curator with something that abstract, and over a course of 2 years, we can kind of funnel it into something.
Yeah, when you talk about the word that you struck me about, the stories, I think that artist is also a storyteller, but then we are finding different way to tell a story in different materials, and in theater, in music, in visual arts. And we, as an artist, I'm not 100% that has to be all communicated the similar way that I wanted to have. But as an artist, that is my job, to be creative and connected and analyze all things around me, and then to use the best of the materials that I can handle to tell story and to share experience and thoughts.
The same thing goes for me. I do find I come from a different culture, like most of us do, but I work with Islamic art and art history, and I want people to understand what I'm doing because it's about communicating with them. So I do feel the need a lot sometimes to not only share my work, but share my thoughts as well, and have conversations as much as I can, so people can understand and appreciate the work differently. A lot of people sometimes complain they don't understand the text in the work itself. They don't understand the meaning of I'm working with bullet shells, and it portrays war, it portrays violence. And so all these things I need sometimes to explain it for people to understand if I want to have that kind of dialogue. So I think it's very important to have that kind of relationship with the viewer and with the audiences.
Well, just to quickly add on that, from a curatorial and institutional positioning, it is one of the challenges, I think, to whether it's interpreting or communicating to the public, which we don't fully understand, who inhabits those publics. We try to be as expansive as possible, but then when you're speaking to the publics, like who is the publics, who's inhabiting these publics, who are reading, and how are we trying to communicate, what are we trying to communicate? I mean, these are all really, really actually tough questions that we ask ourselves, how to provide enough information without giving a particular positioning or answer, leaving it open, while also understanding that there are several different perspectives that we'll be encountering in these works, and also the texts that we produce. So I don't think that institutionally, really, a lot of museums really have an answer. And as Geoffrey, you were saying that the contemporary is an experiment, and I've heard a lot of people actually, talk about the reimagining of the hood as almost as essentially a kind of laboratory as well. And I think trying to think about whether the institution, but also kind of our positioning as one. I think of my position really as one that is experimental. Geoffrey, you touched upon the kind of problematics of a term such as global, and it's something that I am very, very conscious of as well, because I have that in my title. And but I kind of have embraced that I am in a fraught position, and that it will be a challenging one. But I think that we are in a space, fortunately, that museums are finally kind of open to the possibility of such experimentation. It'll be a long road, but as I said to one of my colleagues, I said I'm I'm happy to be in a space where I can potentially affect change that may happen in the future. But I think it's one that's worthwhile, and it's maybe incremental, and I don't know if it'll reach everybody, but I hope that the work that we do is impactful in some way. You in the black and the...
Hi. I was just wondering, as we're continuing to think about creative process and continual growth and development, what is something that each of you would like to communicate to young and growing artists, such as myself and other students in this institution?
Just like waiting for inspiration. Well, I think really stay open and then really look in the both sides of things. That's like the history and what is happening now. Because right now I find that when I teach, student was trying to create everything new, then ignore the history or are not interested about the history. But I find that which is really problematic because what we are having now is so much information, so much kind of things that we have to learn from. So as a creative artist and as well as educator, I really think that that's very important to have the young artists and students to look into how the things that intertwine.
I would say you have to trust yourself, which is actually really hard to do, right? And but one thing I always tell students is that, oftentimes I can walk in for a studio visit and they'll tell me all of the problems that they're experiencing in their work. And I always tell them that the challenge of an artist is to turn those problems into your subject. Like, let that determine figuring out that problem, let that determine your process. And, your studio is entirely yours. Like, it's a place where you have to walk in and kind of leave everyone else's voices at the door. And you have to allow yourself to do exactly what your body and your mind is telling you to do. And every time you have a voice that says, it's too much, it's not smart, it's not any of those things, you just tell that voice to be quiet long enough for you to do what you need to do. Put it away, pull it out again a little bit later, and that's how you develop a practice. And I think without a practice, it's kind of difficult to continue being an artist because you need something that you can return to. And also, I think oftentimes young artists are so concerned with the idea of success and a gallery exhibition or someone coming in and telling them that it's good, that they kind of fail to give themselves over to process and just kind of trust that things don't all have to come together right now. Things come together over a period of time. And then just, I know what I was gonna say. You have to set the bar high enough. You have to have some sort of goal that's worth you fighting for. Because if it's too low, you won't fight for it.
I'll just add to that. I think you should trust your instinct and be honest with yourself and just ignore whatever when you are in your space and within your doing your research or you have a project in mind. You have to quieten all the other voices and follow your own instinct and be very honest with yourself and with your art. And all these challenges is actually the most important things are those challenges. If there is a project or ideas in your mind that keep coming back no matter what you do, I think you should follow that and follow your instinct.
I think we have time for just about one or two more questions. So I saw you first.
Yes, you guys are terrific. This is more directed to Layla. I must say it kind of triggered because John said to us, challenge if you can. So I'm going to play the what if game for Layla, although it may have application. You talked about the power and developing the muscle in that never, never land that you're in, and you got to do it. You need freedom, you need focus, you need intuition and all that stuff. But what if, in your communication particularly, you put men in with women? Because by having just women, in a way, on the one hand, you're focusing, but on the other hand, you're kind of separating from a social structure. So I'm just saying, to me, it would be interesting to see if you get men, you may get a better acceptance of your audience.
First, thank you. Thank you. I will keep that in mind. My work, I mean, sadly, 10 minutes is not enough to talk more about the work and what I'm trying to do. It's mostly based on my personal history and what I know is being a woman. And the women in my photographs, they are also family members, and we have we have strong connections to the spaces we work with, and the whole history behind the project is it was necessary that they are women, and not any women. They have to be women from Morocco, and women I collaborate with, which means I engage over the years. And it's a collaboration, which means that every single thing I do, they really take a very active part of it. So there's a lot of performance, and the idea of using men in the future, that's another thing, maybe, but I'm still working with this project. You know, I'm starting something and I don't feel that I accomplished what I want to, but thank you.
I'm gonna just open one more question. Yes, you and with the glasses there.
Hi, so I'm from Malaysia and I'm also an artist, and you know, sometimes as an international artist working in the West, you're like trying to communicate where you're from, and it's sometimes very hard when your country is very simplified in the global colloquial way. And so a lot of your work touch upon personal history and personal experiences. How do you make your personal story relevant in the global contemporary world? And I, as a young artist, tend to erase myself sometimes to adapt to the so-called contemporary art world or mainstream. You know, oh, who cares about how I grew up or how my childhood is when people don't even know much about my country? And so how do you bring up that voice within yourself and project it in this so-called global contemporary?
I think everything started from your experience. Like when I moved to North America and studied, graduate school, because of my language, I being kind of penalized about my ability. But that make me, it's a personal story. But it's a power for me, because if I don't have that resistance, I may not turn into my energy, as what Geoffrey will mention. There's nothing that you are worth to fight for. But then they always like to, we start off with something, but for me particularly because of the languages, English is my second language. So, but it's not just only my issues. It's a lot of people who are coming from Malaysia, from Singapore, or from China, from Japan, and all over the Asian people. We all face the same thing. But then how are you going to navigate and negotiate with yourself and then with your work? I'm not hiding it. I'm not trying to stay. I have to be international. But that's what I negotiated with it.
I think it is a challenge being from different culture and a culture that is not sometimes appreciated. But I think for me, what really worked was when I'm doing my work, I have ideas and I have issues that I have to deal with. I don't think of the art world. I don't think of the critic. I don't think of an audience, because otherwise, whatever you do in your work, it becomes somehow constructed based on what other people are going to think about you. And then your voice becomes stronger. And you have to follow your heart and be honest and just do your work. And that work will be strong enough to make people realize many things about you and about your country, and you'll be able to talk about it.
I think everything that you just said is exactly what I meant. It's like turn that into a subject. Like it's maybe you're being held accountable for explaining why this is a problem with this term, global contemporary, because many cultures are not represented. I mean, I think there's so many questions you're going to encounter along the process, and I do think it's important. For me, there was a period in 2010, 2011 where I was ready to walk away from being an artist, and in my paintings, I was always referencing weaving, I was referencing beadwork, I was referencing all of these very specific cultural materials and practices. And I returned to New York after having been away for a couple of years, deciding to remove the distance between me and the reference. And that immediately had me working with fiber and craft. And I remember making a decision, if I didn't become an artist, I was gonna be okay with it. If I became a crafter, I would be okay with it. And then, obviously, my kind of stamp is not coming from a craft-specific perspective, but it's more like in consideration and conceptually thinking about craft and how it's functioned. So I would say the same thing to you, just as blunt as you possibly can, turn all of that question that you just expressed to us into your subject and develop a body of work.
All right, well, thank you very much. And